Waking up in the body of a notorious stepmother. A modern woman must rewrite the fate of a future tyrant before his bloodlust consumes the empire. By replacing cruelty with calculated affection, carbs, and strategic mentorship, she transforms a vengeful prince into a righteous hero, subverting the original timeline's tragic end through unexpected, completely unscripted romantic devotion. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. I died choking on a remarkably dry piece of garlic bread while aggressively scrolling through the final chapters of the trashy web novel, The Tyrant's Bloody Crown. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a ridiculously lavish four-poster bed, draped in enough silk to parachute out of an airplane, with a terrified maid frantically calling me Duchess Valeria. It took exactly 3 minutes of hyperventilating in front of a gilded, floor-to-ceiling mirror to realize the horrifying truth. I hadn't just reincarnated. I had reincarnated as that Valeria, the notorious, cartoonishly evil stepmother of Prince Lucius. You know, the Lucius who grows up to be the bloodthirsty imperial tyrant who eventually executes Valeria by having her launched out of a catapult into an active volcano. Yeah, that guy. In the original novel, Valeria was a petty, superficial 20-year-old noblewoman forced by her family to marry the ancient, ailing Duke of Archenland. Out of sheer bitterness, she took her frustrations out on his 15-year-old illegitimate son, Lucius. She starved him, locked him out of the manor in winter, and basically handed him the trauma that would later fuel his global villain arc. But looking at the calendar on the mahogany desk, I realized I had lucked out. It was year 1042. The Duke had just died of gout last week, meaning I was now a very young, very rich, and entirely unbothered widow. More importantly, Lucius was currently 15, making me only 5 years his senior. He was already glaring at me with the intensity of 1,000 suns, but he hadn't yet acquired the political power, or the physical upper body strength, to launch me into any magma. The survival plan was simple. Step 1. Stop acting like a Disney villain on a power trip. Step 2. Feed the kid something other than stale bread and resentment. Step 3. Turn the future tyrant into a functioning, emotionally stable member of society, so I could eventually retire to a seaside villa with my head still firmly attached to my neck. Easier said than done. When I marched down to the gloomy training yard that morning, I found my brooding stepson aggressively hacking at a wooden dummy. His messy black hair fell over eyes that were the exact color of a do not enter sign. Lucius, I called out, trying to channel maternal warmth instead of sheer, unadulterated terror. He paused, gripping the wooden sword so tightly his knuckles turned white. What do you want, stepmother? Have you come to inspect my misery? Actually, I said, holding up a picnic basket overflowing with fresh pastries and roasted meats. I came to inspect your appetite. I realized my previous parenting strategy of vague psychological warfare wasn't working out. So we're pivoting to carbs and constructive criticism. Eat up. We have a lot of trauma to undo. He stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. After all, how hard could it be to reform a teenage edgelord? I just needed to apply some basic modern psychology, a ridiculous amount of positive reinforcement, and maybe teach him how to use his words instead of a broadsword. If I played my cards right, I wouldn't just be saving the empire from a future reign of terror. I'd be saving my own skin. Let the ultimate villain-rehabilitation project begin. Chapter 1. The silence in the training yard was so thick you could have chopped it with the wooden practice sword Lucius was clutching. He stared at the wicker basket in my hands, then slowly raised his gaze to my face. His dark eyes, framed by an unruly mop of sweat-dampened black hair, were narrowed in absolute, venomous suspicion. What is this? He demanded, his voice cracking slightly. A stark reminder that the future scourge of the continent was currently just an angsty 15-year-old going through puberty. I believe the culinary term is lunch, I replied, maintaining a cheerful, non-threatening smile that was making my cheeks cramp. I set the basket down on a nearby stone bench and flipped open the checkered cloth. The scent of warm bread, roasted pheasant, and honey-glazed berries wafted into the crisp morning air. Lucius took a deliberate step back, his knuckles white around the hilt of his wooden sword. Is it poisoned? It's a blueberry muffin, Lucius. Blueberries are notoriously good at masking the bitter aftertaste of deadly nightshade, he shot back, glaring at the pastry as if it were a live grenade. And roasted pheasant can easily hide the scent of arsenic. I'm not stupid, stepmother. If you want me dead so badly, you'll have to use your own hands, not the kitchen staff. I let out a long, very un-Duchess-like sigh. In the original novel, the old Valeria had actually tried to poison him at least twice. So honestly, the kid's paranoia was entirely justified. But my survival depended on him eating his feelings instead of burying them deep down to fuel a future reign of terror. Lucius, I said, dropping the overly sweet smile for a look of deadpan exhaustion. Do I look like I have the energy to forage for nightshade? I barely had the lung capacity to survive getting laced into this corset this morning. Furthermore, if I wanted you dead, I wouldn't waste high-quality, perfectly good pheasant to do it. He didn't budge. His stomach, however, betrayed him with a loud, hollow growl. The original Valeria had restricted his meals to stale bread and watery soup for the past 6 months. He was practically vibrating with hunger, but his pride, and his very reasonable fear of assassination, kept him glued to the spot. Fine. Observe, I said. I marched over to the basket, grabbed the largest, most plump blueberry muffin, and aggressively bit off half of it. I chewed with exaggerated enthusiasm, maintaining unbroken, slightly unhinged eye contact with my bewildered stepson. I mumbled around a mouthful of crumbs. Delicious. Oh no, is that the bitter tang of nightshade? Nope. Just butter. Exquisite high-fat butter. I swallowed heavily, grabbed a chicken leg, and took a massive bite out of that, too. Valeria, what are you doing? Lucius asked, his brooding villain persona momentarily fracturing into utter confusion. Noblewomen don't eat like feral wolves. This noblewoman is proving a point, I said, ignoring the lack of manners, wiping a smear of grease from my chin. I gestured grandly to myself. Look at me. Still breathing. No foaming at the mouth. No sudden collapse. The food is safe, Lucius. I am officially declaring a ceasefire. I stepped away from the bench, leaving the basket behind. Eat. You need protein if you ever want to actually dent that practice dummy instead of just giving it light splinters. I turned on my heel and began to walk away, letting the heavy silk of my skirts dramatically sweep the dirt. I didn't look back. I knew that if I hovered, he wouldn't touch it out of sheer teenage defiance. It took all my willpower not to peek over my shoulder. But as I reached the heavy iron gates of the training yard, I heard the faint, distinct rustle of a checkered cloth being moved. I allowed myself a tiny, victorious smirk. The future tyrant was eating a muffin. Phase 1 of the villain-rehabilitation project was officially a success. The foundation of our new relationship wouldn't be built on blood and trauma. It was going to be paved with baked goods. Chapter 2. A week into the carb and constructive criticism protocol, I made a horrifying discovery. The future scourge of the continent, the man destined to conquer neighboring kingdoms and plunge the world into an era of bloody darkness, had absolutely terrible footwork. I sat under the shade of a massive oak tree at the edge of the training yard, sipping a glass of iced lemonade. I watched as Lucius fiercely hacked at the wooden dummy. He had plenty of teenage rage fueling his swings, but his defense was practically non-existent. If the dummy had possessed functioning arms, Lucius would have been decapitated 3 times over. You're leaning too far forward, I called out, adjusting the lace of my parasol. If an enemy steps to the left, you're going to face plant into the dirt. Lucius stopped, panting heavily, and shot me a glare that could curdle milk. If you are so knowledgeable in the blade, stepmother, why don't you come down here and show me? Because I am wearing a dress that weighs more than you do, and my singular martial skill is aggressively avoiding conflict, I replied smoothly, taking a long sip of lemonade. Which is why I brought a professional. I gestured to the towering, heavily scarred man standing silently behind my chair. Sir Reginald was a retired knight commander of the Royal Guard, a veteran of 3 wars, and a man whose resting face screamed, I have killed men with a soup spoon. I had spent an exorbitant amount of the late Duke's gold to coax him out of retirement. Lucius's eyes darted to the massive knight, his posture instantly stiffening. His wooden sword raised defensively. Who is this? An executioner? Have you finally tired of trying to poison me, and decided to have me butchered in broad daylight? Lucius, please, my flair for the dramatic is entirely internal, I sighed. This is Sir Reginald. He is going to teach you how to hold a sword without looking like a flailing chicken. Reginald, if you will. The old knight gave a curt bow, drew a blunt training sword from the weapon rack, and stepped into the yard. "The Duchess tells me you have spirit, young master. Let us see if you have the skill to match." Lucius didn't hesitate. Fueled by a potent mix of adrenaline and paranoia, he lunged at the old knight with a wild, overhead strike. Sir Reginald didn't even blink. With a casual flick of his wrist, he parried the blow, hooked his foot behind Lucius's ankle, and sent the young duke crashing onto his back in the dust. "Dead," Sir Reginald announced calmly. From my comfortable seat under the oak tree, I raised my glass. 10 points for enthusiasm, -50 for spatial awareness. Again. Lucius scrambled up, his face burning red with humiliation. He gritted his teeth and rushed in again. This time, Reginald disarmed him so fast the wooden sword spun through the air and landed in a rosebush. "Dead again," Reginald rumbled. "You strike with anger, boy. Anger makes you predictable. You want to kill the enemy so badly you forget to protect yourself." Over the next 2 hours, the future tyrant was unceremoniously dropped into the dirt no less than 30 times. And for the first time since I had transmigrated into this absurd novel, I saw a flicker of something other than hatred in Lucius's eyes. It was respect. Sir Reginald wasn't mocking him. He wasn't hurting him maliciously. He was correcting his grip, adjusting his stance, and speaking to him not as an unwanted bastard, but as a squire worthy of instruction. The father figure Lucius had been so desperately denied in the original plot had just arrived, courtesy of his wicked stepmother. "Keep your elbows tucked," I shouted helpfully as Lucius picked himself up from the dust for the 31st time. "Don't lead with your face." Lucius whipped his head toward me, wiping a smear of dirt from his cheek. "Are you just going to sit there and mock me all afternoon?" "No," I smiled, lifting a fresh pitcher. "I also brought snacks. Do you want a lemon tart before Reginald completely destroys your ego, or after?" Lucius glared at me, panting heavily. But as he looked from the pitcher of lemonade to the gruff but patient knight waiting for him, his shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "After," he muttered, turning back to his new mentor. I leaned back in my chair, utterly delighted. The future villain was currently more concerned with his parries than his vengeance. We were making excellent progress. Chapter 3. I should have known the peaceful training montage wouldn't last. In any self-respecting web novel, right around the time the protagonist starts getting comfortable, the universe throws in a life or death scenario just to keep the plot moving. I just didn't expect it to happen on a Tuesday evening while I was trying to enjoy a quiet cup of chamomile tea in the glass conservatory. Lucius was sitting across from me, intensely glaring at a book on agricultural tax reform. It had been 2 months since the bread protocol began. We weren't exactly braiding each other's hair, but the sheer homicidal tension between us had thawed into a manageable, mildly sarcastic coexistence. Then, the glass ceiling shattered. It wasn't a subtle entrance. 3 figures dressed in the standard, historically inaccurate, assassin black, dropped through the falling shards of glass, landing in the indoor flower beds. "Ah," I thought, frozen with my teacup halfway to my mouth. The late Duke's cousin's goons. They're early. In the original novel, these assassins were the catalyst for Lucius's first real murder spree, cementing his path toward darkness. Valeria had supposedly locked him in the garden and run away to save herself. I, however, did not run. Mostly because I was wearing sensible velvet slippers with absolutely zero traction, and my brain had completely short-circuited. "Lucius, move," I finally screeched. Lucius reacted with the honed reflexes Sir Reginald had literally beaten into him over the last 8 weeks. He kicked the heavy wrought iron table toward the nearest assassin, dodging a throwing knife. But he was unarmed. His training sword was in the yard, and he was currently trying to fend off a trained killer with a volume on tax law. 2 of the assassins cornered him against the climbing roses. The third one drew a wicked-looking curved dagger and lunged at his exposed back. I didn't think. If Lucius died, the plot derailed. If the plot derailed, I was probably going to be murdered by the Duke's greedy cousin anyway to tie up loose ends. Also, despite his prickly exterior, I had spent the last 2 months feeding this kid muffins. You don't just let someone murder your project. I grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a massive, ornate brass candlestick sitting on the tea cart. Channeling every ounce of adrenaline in my body, I hefted the solid brass weapon, ran across the damp marble floor, and swung it like a baseball bat. Crack! The heavy base of the candlestick connected perfectly with the back of the assassin's skull. He went down like a sack of extremely heavy potatoes, his dagger flying from his hand and grazing my upper arm as he fell. I let out a very unduchess-like yelp as a sharp, hot pain sliced through my sleeve. I dropped the candlestick with a loud clatter and clutched my bleeding arm, panting heavily. Hearing the commotion, Lucius whipped around. He saw the unconscious assassin at my feet, my bloodied sleeve, and the sheer unadulterated terror on my face. Before the other two assassins could process that their comrade had just been felled by interior decor, the doors to the conservatory burst open. Sir Reginald stormed in, looking absolutely delighted to have a reason to use his sword, and dispatched the remaining threats in under 30 seconds. The room fell dead silent, save for the dripping of the indoor fountain and my own ragged breathing. Lucius slowly walked over to me, sidestepping the unconscious man on the floor. His eyes were wide, darting from the heavy brass candlestick to the tear in my velvet sleeve where dark blood was beginning to blossom. You. His voice wavered, stripping away the tough exterior to reveal a genuinely shocked teenager. You hit him. You took a blade for me. Are you okay? I gasped out, my knees finally deciding they had had enough and buckling slightly. Lucius caught my uninjured arm, steadying me. His grip was surprisingly strong. Am I okay? You are bleeding, Valeria. I mean, stepmother. Why didn't you run? Because. I winced as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a throbbing ache in its wake. You're my stepson. And I told you. We are doing things differently now. Lucius stared at me. For the first time since I had woken up in this ridiculous world, there wasn't a single trace of suspicion or hatred in his eyes. There was only utter, bewildered awe. I gave him a weak smile before the world tilted slightly. Also, remind me to give Sir Reginald a raise. And maybe, let's avoid the conservatory for a while. As I let myself lean against him, I realized one crucial thing. The villain's tragic backstory was officially rewritten. Now, I just had to survive the rest of the novel. Chapter 4. 6 years is a long time in the world of trashy web novels. It is exactly enough time for a male lead's genetics to activate like a dormant, extremely attractive superpower. When I was 20, dealing with a scrawny, glaring 15-year-old was easy. He was a project. A hostile, pointy-elbowed rescue cat that I was slowly coaxing out from under the sofa with snacks and basic human decency. But now? I was 26, and my rescue cat had morphed into a terrifyingly handsome apex predator. I was sitting in the estate's grand library, buried under a mountain of agricultural ledgers, when the heavy oak door swung open. You're working late again, a deep, smooth voice echoed across the room. I looked up from my inkwell, and my brain instantly did a hard reboot. Lucius strode into the library, looking like he had just stepped off the cover of a medieval romance novel. Gone was the scrawny, brooding edgelord. At 19 he had shot up to a towering 6'2". His shoulders were broad from 6 years of relentless training with Sir Reginald. And his messy black hair now perfectly framed a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He was wearing a fitted, dark linen tunic that frankly left very little to the imagination regarding his upper body strength. I have to work late, I managed to say, willing my voice to sound perfectly normal and maternal. Someone has to make sure our tenant farmers aren't getting gouged on the new grain taxes. He walked over to my desk, his boots making no sound on the plush rugs. Instead of sitting in the chair across from me, he stepped around the massive desk and leaned against the edge of it, crossing his arms and looking down at my ledger. You've been staring at those numbers for 3 hours, Valeria, he murmured, no longer calling me stepmom. He was standing entirely too close. I could smell the scent of the training yard on him, mixed with a crisp, sandalwood soap. I suddenly realized that I had to tilt my head back quite far just to meet his eyes. When had he gotten this tall? More importantly, why did my stomach just do a completely uncalled-for backflip? I'm fine, I said, aggressively dipping my quill into the inkwell. Just doing my duty as Dowager Duchess. Right, Lucius said. A slow, infuriatingly charming smile spread across his lips. It wasn't the cynical sneer he used to wear. It was a genuine, warm smile that made his dark eyes crinkle at the corners. Because the Dowager Duchess always writes the year 1045 backward when she's entirely focused. I glanced down at the parchment. Sure enough, I had scrawled 5401 in the margins. It's a cipher. I lied smoothly, feeling a sudden, intense heat creeping up the back of my neck. For security. Lucius chuckled, a low, rumbling sound in his chest. He reached out, and for a split second, my breath caught in my throat. But he merely plucked the quill from my stiff fingers and set it down on the desk. "You need rest," he said gently, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly very small. "I'll review the ledgers tomorrow. The estate can survive one night without its savior." "I am not the savior, I am just fiscally responsible," I stammered, abruptly standing up to create some distance. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "And it's incredibly hot in here. Unbearably hot. Is there a fire lit? Why is it so warm?" Lucius looked at the completely empty, cold fireplace. Then he looked back at me, his smile widening just a fraction. "It's the middle of May, Valeria. And the windows are open." "Well, it's an unseasonable heat wave," I declared, frantically grabbing a blank piece of parchment to fan my flushed face. "Global warming. It's a tragedy. Good night, Lucius." I practically sprinted out of the library, my velvet skirt swishing wildly around my ankles. As I hurried down the cool stone corridor, I pressed a cold hand to my burning cheeks. "Pull yourself together," I mentally scolded myself. He is the male lead. You are the survival-oriented side character. Do not let the puberty glow-up distract you from the mission. But as I reached my bedchambers, my heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Surviving the future tyrant was one thing. Surviving his transition into a devastatingly handsome young man? That wasn't in the survival guide. Chapter 5. If there was one thing I despised more than the excruciatingly tight corsets of this era, it was high society. The capital's annual spring gala was less of a party and more of a heavily choreographed battlefield where ambitious nobles tried to marry off their daughters to the highest bidder. And this year, the undisputed grand prize was the newly 21, terrifyingly wealthy, and infuriatingly handsome Duke of Archenland. I had strategically positioned myself at the absolute edge of the ballroom, seeking refuge behind a massive tower of cream puffs. From my vantage point, I watched the absolute chaos unfold. Lucius, dressed in a midnight blue tailcoat with silver embroidery that perfectly accentuated his broad shoulders, was surrounded. A swarm of giggling debutantes and scheming dowagers had corralled him near the string quartet. He looked incredibly bored, nursing a glass of wine with the stoic endurance of a man facing a firing squad. "Look at him," I thought proudly, popping a cream puff into my mouth. A functioning member of society. Noblo of lust. No casual executions. I am the greatest stepmother in the history of fiction. I expected him to finally relent and offer his hand to one of the blushing young ladies. Instead, his dark eyes scanned the room, cutting through the glittering crowd until they landed squarely on me. Before I could swallow my pastry, Lucius politely but firmly pushed past the wall of aristocratic perfume. He walked with a predatory grace straight across the ballroom floor, completely ignoring the offended gasps of the women he left in his wake. He stopped in front of me, the crystal chandeliers catching the dark, messy waves of his hair. "Are you hiding behind the desserts, Valeria?" he asked, a familiar, teasing smirk playing on his lips. "I am not hiding. I am maintaining a tactical perimeter," I replied, hastily wiping powdered sugar from my dark green silk dress. "What are you doing over here? You're supposed to be mingling, building alliances, finding a nice girl who doesn't think you're going to catapult her into a volcano." "I have no interest in alliances with girls who only want my title," he said smoothly. He set his wine glass on the dessert table and held out a gloved hand. "Dance with me." I stared at his hand as if it were a venomous snake. "Absolutely not. Valeria." "I am a dowager duchess," I hissed, leaning in so the nearest gossiping Marchioness couldn't hear. "I am a respectable, grieving widow. A decrepit crone of 26. I belong in the shadows with the chaperones and the carbohydrates. My father has been dead for 6 years, and you didn't even like him," Lucius pointed out, completely unbothered. "Furthermore, you are wearing a dress that costs more than a small village. You did not wear it to stand by the pastries." Before I could formulate a counterargument, Lucius bypassed my refusal entirely. He caught my hand, his grip warm and firm, and effortlessly pulled me away from my sanctuary. "Lucius, wait," I squeaked, but it was too late. With a smooth, practiced motion, he swept me directly into the center of the ballroom, just as the orchestra began a slow, sweeping waltz. One of his hands clasped mine, while the other settled warmly against the curve of my waist. The entire ballroom went dead silent. You could have heard a hairpin drop. You are causing a massive scandal, I whispered fiercely, my face burning as hundreds of eyes locked onto us. Let them stare, Lucius murmured. He stepped into the music, leading me with a flawless, commanding rhythm. I was forced to follow, my skirt swirling around his polished boots. The sheer proximity was dizzying. I had to tilt my head up to meet his gaze, and the intense, smoldering look in his dark eyes completely knocked the breath out of my lungs. They are going to talk, I warned, my voice suddenly feeling very small as he spun me gracefully across the polished marble. I am your stepmother. Lucius leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that sent a shiver straight down my spine. We both know that title has always been a technicality. And quite frankly, Valeria, I don't care what they have to say. As the music swelled, and he pulled me just a fraction of an inch closer, the whispering of the crowd faded into white noise. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that the Empire's rumor mill was about to explode. And that my perfectly logical, emotionally detached survival plan was officially in ruins. Chapter 6. Lady Alara of House Vance did not just walk into a room. She practically floated on a gentle, non-existent breeze. She had spun gold hair, eyes the size and color of robin's eggs, and a demeanor so saccharine sweet it made my teeth ache. I was pretty sure she naturally emitted a soft, glowing filter. She was, in every conceivable way, the perfect web novel heroine. And I was absolutely thrilled. The morning after the disastrously scandalous spring gala, I immediately went into overdrive. If the ballroom dance had proven anything, it was that my survival plan was teetering on a very precarious, very romantic edge. I needed to get the original plot back on track before my rogue heartbeat dragged me into the doomed female lead territory. I needed to pass the baton. I arranged a casual, afternoon tea in the estate's sprawling rose gardens. I invited Alara under the guise of discussing a charity auction. And I lured Lucius out of his study by vaguely threatening to reorganize his weapon racks if he didn't join me for 15 minutes. When Lucius finally strode down the gravel path, dressed in a casual black tunic and looking dangerously irritated, I struck my best matchmaking pose. Lucius, I chirped, aggressively gesturing toward the human sunbeam sitting across from me. Look who dropped by. It's the lovely Lady Alara. Doesn't she look lovely? So lovely. Alara blushed a shade of perfect, delicate pink. She lowered her eyes and gave a tiny, flawless curtsy. It is an honor to meet you, Your Grace. The Duchess has told me so much about your bravery. Lucius stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Alara, then slowly turned his gaze to me. His eyes narrowed, instantly seeing through my thinly veiled trap. The temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees. Has she? Lucius said flatly. He didn't sit down. He didn't even offer a polite bow. He just stood there, radiating the kind of intense, brooding energy that usually preceded a declaration of war. Yes. I practically shouted, nudging a plate of macarons toward Alara. Why don't you two take a stroll toward the koi pond? I hear the fish are particularly romantic this time of year. Alara looked up, her large blue eyes shining with hopeful innocence. I would love a tour of the gardens, Your Grace, if you have the time. Lucius stared at her for exactly 3 seconds. I hate fish, he stated bluntly. And I am allergic to forced conversation. Alara blinked, her perfect smile faltering. I choked on my tea. Lucius. I hissed, slamming my teacup down. Manners. Manners are for people who haven't been ambushed in their own home, he shot back, his voice low and dangerous. He turned his attention entirely to me, stepping closer to my chair. If you want to play games, Valeria, do it on your own time. Do not use my time to entertain strangers. She's not a stranger, she's the protagonist. I wanted to scream, but instead, I forced a tight, panicked smile. She is a delightful young woman. You are an eligible young duke. This is basic math. I am not a mathematical equation for you to solve, Lucius growled, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. The scent of sandalwood and sheer annoyance washed over me. I am not interested in the Lady Vance. I am not interested in any lady you attempt to parade in front of me. Am I making myself entirely clear? I swallowed hard, pinned under his furious, dark stare. Crystal. Good. Lucius straightened up, offering a curt, completely unapologetic nod to the bewildered heroine. Lady Alara. Have a safe journey home. Without another word, he turned on his heel and marched back toward the manor, leaving me alone with a terrified heroine and a plate of rapidly cooling pastries. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a long, defeated groan. The original plot wasn't just derailed. Lucius had strapped it to a barrel of gunpowder and lit the match. My retirement villa was slipping further and further away, replaced by the terrifying realization that the villain didn't want the heroine at all. He wanted me. Chapter 7. My logic was flawless. If I removed myself from the equation, Lucius would be forced to actually look at other women. Nature abhors a vacuum, and surely the gaping void of my absence would eventually be filled by the radiant, canonically approved Lady Alara. So when the very polite, very boring Marquis Julian of a neighboring province sent a formal request to court the beautiful Dowager Duchess, I immediately said yes. It's just a carriage ride and a picnic by the Silver Lake, I told my reflection in the mirror, adjusting a pearl hairpin. A perfectly safe, perfectly distracting afternoon with a man whose primary personality trait is a deep appreciation for imported velvet. By noon, I was sitting on a plush tartan blanket by the sparkling waters of the lake, politely nodding as the Marquis droned on about his family's lucrative sheep trade. He was handsome in a soft, harmless way, with sandy blonde hair, and a smile that didn't make my heart hammer frantically against my ribs. It was relaxing. It was safe. It lasted exactly 45 minutes. The thunder of hooves interrupted the Marquis's thrilling monologue on wool tariffs. I turned my head just in time to see a massive, terrifyingly fast black stallion tear down the dirt path toward our secluded picnic spot. My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew that horse. Lucius pulled the stallion to a halt so aggressively it reared up on its hind legs, kicking up a cloud of dust that instantly coated the Marquis's meticulously curated spread of imported cheeses. Lucius didn't wait for the horse to fully settle before he swung himself out of the saddle. He was dressed in his riding leathers, looking like a dark, furious storm cloud descended upon the earth. His jaw was clenched so tight I was surprised his teeth hadn't shattered. "Your Grace!" Marquis Julian scrambled to his feet, dusting off his doublet with panicked, jerky movements. "To what do we owe the honor of your—" Lucius completely ignored him. His dark, murderous gaze was locked entirely on me. "Valeria, get up." I stayed sitting on the blanket, crossing my arms defensively. "Lucius, what are you doing here? I am in the middle of a lovely afternoon." "The afternoon is over," he stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a flock of nearby geese scrambling into the water. "There is an urgent estate emergency. I require your immediate presence at the manor." I narrowed my eyes. "An emergency? What kind of emergency?" Lucius didn't miss a beat. "The South Bridge. It has a crack. A structural vulnerability." "A structural vulnerability?" I echoed incredulously. "Lucius, the South Bridge is made of solid granite. It was built 200 years ago. And even if it did have a crack, what exactly do you expect me to do about it? Smother it with a poultice? I am not a stonemason. You are the Dowager Duchess. Your fiscal expertise is required to approve the emergency repair funds." He lied smoothly, though his eyes were flashing with unadulterated possessiveness. He stepped directly onto the tartan blanket, crushing a wedge of brie under his heavy leather boot, and offered me his hand. "Now Valeria." Marquis Julian, bless his soft, sheep-loving heart, tried to intervene. "Your Grace, surely the bridge can wait an hour or two. We were just about to cut the lemon cake." Lucius finally turned his gaze to the Marquis. It was the exact look he used to give the practice dummy, right before he decapitated it. "Marquis Julian, if you value your family's wool trade, and your ability to physically walk, you will step away from my stepmother." The Marquis paled, practically dissolving into the scenery. Knowing that Lucius was about 5 seconds away from reverting to his original villainous programming, and throwing the poor man into the lake, I slapped my hand into Lucius's outstretched palm. "Fine," I hissed, letting him haul me to my feet. "But you are reimbursing him for the cheese." Lucius didn't say a word. He practically dragged me to his horse, grabbed me by the waist, and effortlessly tossed me into the saddle before swinging up behind me. As we galloped away from the ruined picnic, leaving the bewildered Marquis in the dust, Lucius kept one arm securely wrapped around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. I could feel the furious, heavy pounding of his heart against my spine. "There is no crack in the bridge, is there?" I shouted over the rushing wind. "The bridge is in pristine condition," Lucius yelled back, his breath hot against my ear. Then why did you ruin my date? His arm tightened around me, his voice dropping into a fierce, territorial growl that made my toes curl. Because if I have to watch another mediocre man try to court what is mine, I am going to burn the capital to the ground. No more matchmaking, Valeria. No more running. I squeezed my eyes shut against the rushing wind, realizing with absolute certainty that I had successfully saved the world from a tyrant, but I was completely and utterly trapped by the hero. Chapter 8. In the original timeline of the Tyrant's Bloody Crown, Chapter 42 was famously known as the Red Hall Massacre. A corrupt faction of royal advisors, led by the greedy Lord Thorn, attempted to frame a 21-year-old Lucius for treason. In response, Lucius barred the doors to the imperial court and systematically introduced every single advisor to the pointy end of a broadsword. It was the moment he officially crossed the line from misunderstood youth to unhinged war criminal. So, as I sat in the plush velvet gallery overlooking the actual imperial court, listening to Lord Thorn confidently accuse Lucius of hoarding imperial steel to fund a private rebellion, I was sweating right through my silk bodice. The evidence is undeniable, Your Majesty, Lord Thorn bellowed, gesturing dramatically to a pile of forged shipping manifests in the center of the room. The Duke of Archenland is importing enough iron and steel to arm 1,000 men. He plans to march on the capital. He must be stripped of his title and executed for treason. A collective, scandalous gasp echoed through the grand hall. I gripped the mahogany railing so tightly my fingers went numb. I scanned the floor for Lucius. He was standing in the center of the room, dressed in immaculate, intimidating black velvet. He wasn't reaching for the hilt of his sword. He wasn't baring his teeth like a cornered animal. In fact, he looked mildly bored. Are you finished, Lord Thorn? Lucius asked, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmuring crowd. I am finished when the king demands your head, boy. Thorn spat. Lucius let out a slow, heavy sigh, a sigh I recognized as the exact one he used when I made him redo his agricultural ledgers. He casually reached into his coat and pulled out a thick stack of neatly bound parchment. Your Majesty, Lucius said, bowing smoothly to the aging king on the throne. Lord Thorn is correct. I have been importing massive quantities of imperial steel. However, if Lord Thorn had bothered to check the provincial manufacturing registry, which is legally required under Imperial Decree 402, Section B, he would know that the steel is not being forged into swords. Lucius snapped his fingers. Sir Reginald, standing by the heavy oak doors, pushed open a set of double doors to reveal a plow. A very shiny, highly efficient-looking farming plow. I am modernizing the agricultural infrastructure of the northern provinces, Lucius stated dryly. We are transitioning from wooden plows to steel-tipped ones to increase the wheat yield before winter. The court fell entirely silent. Lord Thorn's face turned the color of a bruised plum. That is a lie. The shipping routes are heavily taxed, Lucius interrupted smoothly. Which brings me to my next point. While auditing my own imports, I cross-referenced the capital's tariff ledgers. It appears Lord Thorn has been skimming 30% off the top of all northern agricultural imports for the last decade, hiding the stolen gold in offshore accounts registered to his wife's maiden name. The silence in the room deepened from shocked to absolutely lethal. Lucius didn't draw a blade. He didn't lock the doors. He just handed his stack of meticulously researched, legally binding financial receipts directly to the king's chancellor. I believe the penalty for treasonous embezzlement against the crown is the immediate seizure of all lands and assets, followed by life imprisonment in the deep dungeons, Lucius said, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. He looked at Thorn, flashing a dark, terrifyingly polite smile. Checkmate, my lord. As the royal guards dragged a screaming, financially ruined Lord Thorn out of the hall, I slumped back into my velvet chair, pressing a hand to my chest. Be still, my beating heart, I thought, overwhelmed with a wave of absolute, euphoric pride. He didn't murder anyone. He used tax law. Down on the court floor, surrounded by awestruck nobles, Lucius slowly turned his head and looked directly up at my spot in the gallery. The cold, calculating aristocrat vanished, replaced by a soft, victorious smirk meant only for me. I didn't just prevent a massacre. I had accidentally created a weapon of mass administrative destruction. And looking at him standing there, dangerously brilliant and entirely in control, I had to admit, bureaucracy had never looked so good. Chapter 9. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. I had successfully survived masked assassins, societal scandals, and the treacherous, backstabbing waters of imperial tax law, only to be utterly defeated by a stiff autumn breeze. What started as a mild sniffle after a walk in the gardens rapidly spiraled into a raging, full-blown fever. Within 48 hours, I was confined to my massive four-poster bed, shivering violently under a mountain of silk blankets while my brain slowly cooked in my skull. Medieval medicine being what it was, the estate's physician suggested balancing my humors with leeches. Lucius, exhibiting a brief but terrifying flash of his canonical villainy, threatened to balance the physician out a third-story window if a single leech was brought into my room. I drifted in and out of consciousness for days, my grasp on reality frayed, blending the opulent walls of the ducal manor with the glowing, scrolling text of the web novel I used to read in my past life. During one particularly bad spike in my fever, I forced my heavy eyelids open. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering embers in the fireplace. Sitting in a chair pulled flush against my mattress was Lucius. He looked terrible. The immaculate, polished Duke of Archenland was gone. His usually perfectly styled black hair was a messy, distressed bird's nest. He was in a wrinkled linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up, and dark, heavy bags hung under his bloodshot eyes. He was holding a damp cloth, gently dabbing the sweat from my forehead with a tenderness that completely wrecked my fragile, fever-addled heart. Lucius. My voice was a dry, raspy croak. He jolted, dropping the cloth into a basin of water. He leaned in immediately, his large, warm hands gently enveloping my freezing ones. Valeria. I'm here. I'm right here. Are you in pain? Do you need water? The catapult. I mumbled, my brain misfiring completely. I stared blankly at the canopy above. You have to cancel the catapult order. Lucius froze. The what? For the volcano. I whimpered, a genuine delirious tear sliding down my hot cheek. It's so dramatic, Lucius. So unnecessary. I gave you muffins. So many carbs. Please don't launch me into the magma. Valeria, listen to me, Lucius said softly, a deep crease of panic forming between his brows. He clearly thought the fever had finally melted my brain. He squeezed my hand gently, bringing my knuckles up to rest against his cheek. No one is launching you anywhere. There are no catapults. You are safe in your bed. The plot, I babbled, trying to pull my hand away, but I had the upper body strength of wet paper. The tyrant. You're supposed to be evil. I'm supposed to be dead. I am not a tyrant, he whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, desperate vulnerability I had never heard from him before. He leaned closer, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears in the firelight. I am just a man who is entirely, helplessly terrified of losing you. I blinked sluggishly, the heat in my blood making his beautiful face blur. You promised we were doing things differently, Lucius murmured, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the back of my trembling hand. You saved me from the dark, Valeria. You gave me light. You gave me a reason to be a good man. He rested his forehead against the edge of the mattress, right next to my pillow. His breath hitched, shaking the broad line of his shoulders. I love you, he confessed into the quiet, stifling air of the sickroom. It wasn't a demand nor a grand, performative gesture. It was a fragile, desperate truth. I have loved you since the day you sat under that oak tree and yelled at me to keep my elbows tucked. I love you, and I am begging you not to leave me. My heart gave a weak, fluttery thump. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't going anywhere. I wanted to tell him that I loved him too, that he had entirely ruined my plans for a quiet retirement, but I'm not sure if I can. But the fever dragged me back under before my mouth could form the words. I slipped back into the darkness, tethered to the waking world only by the firm, unyielding warmth of his hand holding mine. Chapter 10. I woke up to the gentle chirping of birds and the cool, refreshing breeze of an open window. My head no longer felt like it was stuffed with hot cotton, and my skin was delightfully cool. The fever had broken. I had survived. And then, with the force of a runaway carriage, the memory of Lucius's midnight confession hit me. I have loved you since the day you sat under that oak tree. I am begging you not to leave me. I bolted upright in bed, my heart instantly hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. Oh no, I whispered into the empty room, clutching the silk sheets to my chest. Oh, no. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was the side character, the comedic relief with a talent for avoiding magma. I was not supposed to accidentally romance the terrifying, unyielding male lead. We were step relations, for heaven's sake. Panic set in. For the next 3 days, I became a phantom haunting my own estate. I was a master of evasion. If Lucius was in the dining hall, I took my meals in the conservatory. If he was in the training yard, I was suddenly overwhelmingly invested in inspecting the wine cellars. Once, I actually dove behind a heavy velvet tapestry in the hallway when I heard his distinctive, heavy boots approaching. But you can only hide from the Duke of Archenland in his own house for so long. On the 4th day, I thought I was safe in the Grand Library. I was frantically organizing the Eastern Province grain reports, convincing myself that if I just kept my head down, the fever dream confession would vanish into the ether. Click. The heavy lock of the library doors turned. I froze, the parchment slipping from my hands. Lucius leaned against the freshly locked doors, the brass key dangling casually from his long fingers. The exhausted, disheveled boy from my sick room was gone. In his place was the apex predator of high society, dressed in immaculate dark gray tailoring. His eyes locked onto me with the terrifying precision of a hunting hawk. "You are surprisingly fast in a corset, Valeria," he noted dryly, slipping the key into his pocket. "But your evasive maneuvers are getting predictable." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I squeaked, immediately backing up until my spine hit the mahogany bookshelves. "I've just been very busy. Grain yields, soil acidity, very demanding stuff." He didn't smile. He pushed off the doors and began a slow, deliberate march across the room. Every step he took dissolved the distance between us until I was entirely trapped between the shelves and his imposing frame. "You remember," he said softly, stopping just inches away. It wasn't a question. "Remember what? The fever? My delirium?" Because I assure you, my brain was entirely mush. I don't remember a single, romantic, devastatingly heartfelt word anyone might have said in that room. I clamped my hands over my mouth. "Idiot." Lucius stepped closer, bracing one hand on the bookshelf right beside my head. He leaned down, trapping me entirely in his space. The scent of sandalwood and crisp autumn air surrounded me, scrambling whatever logic I had left. "Valeria," he breathed, his dark eyes searching my panicked ones. "Why are you running from me?" "Because society will riot, Lucius," I hissed, my hands dropping to press against his solid chest, a feeble attempt to keep him at bay. "I am your stepmother. It is scandalous. It is highly improper. You are the Duke, and I am the Dowager." Lucius didn't budge. He merely looked down at me, his expression shifting from intense to fiercely logical. "My father was 65 years old when he married you," Lucius stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "It was a political sham arranged over a border dispute. You never shared a bed with him. You share absolutely zero blood with me. The only thing tying us together is a piece of paper signed by a dead man." "But the nobility." "I am the head of house," Lucius interrupted, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. "I command the largest military force in the north, and I hold half the capital's debt. I do not care what the nobility whispers into their teacups. Let them talk. I will ruin anyone who dares speak an ill word against you." "Lucius, you can't just bully society into accepting us," I cried out, my voice cracking. "You have a whole life ahead of you. You are supposed to marry a princess, or a heroine, or—" "I don't want a princess," he said fiercely, his hand leaving the bookshelf to gently cup my cheek, his thumb brushing over my jawline. "I want the woman who hit an assassin with a candlestick to protect me. I want the woman who force-fed me muffins so I wouldn't starve. I want you, Valeria. Only you." My breath hitched. The walls of logic I had frantically built over the last 3 days were crumbling into dust. He wasn't giving me an inch to retreat, dismantling every excuse with that terrifying, brilliant mind of his. But as his thumb stroked my cheek, a dark, familiar fear curled in my stomach. I had saved his life, yes. But I refused to be the scandal that ruined his reign. Chapter 11. I spent exactly 1 sleepless night drafting the legal documents. If I couldn't outmaneuver Lucius's flawless, terrifyingly rational arguments in the library, I had to completely remove the problematic variable from the equation. Me. I was the variable. To protect his future from the stain of an unprecedented societal scandal, the Dowager Duchess needed to quietly exit the narrative. By dawn my bags were packed. I had instructed the royal magistrate to formally strip me of my title, transferring my remaining assets to the estate, and leaving me with a modest stipend and a small, remote villa near the southern coast. It was the seaside retirement I had originally planned, just arriving a few years early and feeling suspiciously like a punishment rather than a reward. I slipped out of the manor while the sky was still a bruised, misty purple. I didn't leave a note. Notes were a classic web novel trope that only ever led to dramatic, rain-soaked misunderstandings. Better to just cleanly vanish. My unassuming wooden carriage was waiting by the servant's entrance. I climbed inside, pulled my heavy travel cloak tight around my shoulders and tapped the roof. The driver clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward, the wheels crunching loudly against the gravel path. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the magnificent stone spires of the Archenland Manor fade into the fog. A massive, suffocating lump formed in my throat. I had done it. The villain was saved. The Empire was safe. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was a hollow, aching emptiness in my chest. We were nearing the massive wrought iron gates of the estate boundary when the carriage suddenly jolted to a violently ungraceful halt. I was thrown forward, narrowly avoiding a face-to-plant maneuver into the opposite seat. "What is it?" I called out, rubbing my bruised knee. "Is it a fallen branch, highwayman?" "Neither," a dark, dangerously quiet voice echoed from outside the carriage door. My blood ran completely cold. The heavy wooden door of the carriage was yanked open with such force, I thought the hinges would snap. Standing there, silhouetted against the rising morning sun, was Lucius. He hadn't bothered to saddle a horse. He had run. He was dressed in hastily thrown on riding leathers, his chest heaving violently, and his messy black hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They were completely unhinged, wild, furious, and filled with a raw, agonizing panic. "Lucius," I gasped, my heart plummeting to my boots. "How did you?" "You signed away your title," he interrupted, his voice shaking with a terrifying, tightly coiled rage. "You transferred your assets. You ordered a carriage at dawn. Did you really think my own magistrate wouldn't immediately wake me up the moment you handed him the paperwork?" "I am doing this for you," I pleaded, shrinking back against the velvet cushions. "To protect your reputation. You cannot be tied to the woman who used to lock you out in the snow. You're doing this because you are a coward," Lucius snapped, practically climbing into the carriage. He didn't care about the driver watching or the guards at the gate. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip painfully tight, anchoring me to the spot. "I am not a coward, I am a realist," I yelled back, tears finally spilling hot and fast over my cheeks. "I am trying to give you the perfect, untainted reign you deserve. A reign without you is exactly what I have been trying to prevent for the last 3 years." Lucius roared, the polished aristocratic mask completely shattering. He pulled me forward, wrapping his arms around me and burying his face in the crook of my neck. He was trembling. The impenetrable, brilliant Duke of Archenland was physically shaking. "You saved me, Valeria," he whispered against my skin, his voice entirely broken. "You reached into the dark and pulled me out. You don't get to abandon me now just because you are frightened of a little gossip. You don't get to run away from your own happiness." I sat frozen, his heavy, desperate weight crushing the breath out of me. The scent of sandalwood and damp morning air enveloped me. I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of tears soaking into his leather collar. The logical, genre-savvy part of my brain screamed that this was a mistake. But as my arms slowly, entirely of their own volition, wrapped around his broad shoulders, pulling him closer, I finally admitted defeat. I couldn't run. The villain had caught me, and heaven help me, I didn't want to be let go. Chapter 12. Because the universe has an undeniable flair for the dramatic, and my life had officially transitioned from a survival thriller into a full-blown romantic cliché, the sky chose that exact moment to crack open. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the estate, and suddenly, the bruised purple clouds unleashed a torrential downpour. "Great," I muttered, my tears instantly mixing with the freezing rain as it pelted through the open carriage door. "Now we're both going to catch pneumonia." Lucius didn't laugh, but the wild, panicked edge finally melted from his eyes, replaced by a profound, breathtaking warmth. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands sliding down to gently but firmly cup my face. His thumbs brushed over my cheekbones, ignoring the rain currently plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Get out of the carriage, Valeria," he said softly. "I am in velvet, Lucius. It's going to ruin the upholstery." He didn't wait for my complaints. He stepped back into the muddy gravel, reached in, and effortlessly lifted me out of the carriage by my waist. I gasped as my feet hit the ground, the heavy hem of my travel cloak instantly dragging in the puddles. I expected him to drag me back to the manor, to lock me in a tower like the villain he was originally written to be. Instead, he took a half-step back, entirely ignoring the torrential downpour and the bewildered carriage driver watching us from the box. Lucius took both of my hands in his. He stood tall, looking at me not as a conqueror, but as an equal. "I am not a tyrant," Lucius said, his voice steady and carrying easily over the sound of the rain. "I do not want your submission, and I do not want to trap you. I am asking for a partnership. You are the sharpest, bravest, and most infuriatingly stubborn woman I have ever known. I cannot run this province without you, and I refuse to live my life without you in it." He dropped to one knee right there in the mud, ruining a perfectly good pair of imported leather trousers. I covered my mouth with a trembling hand, a fresh sob escaping my lips. "Marry me, Valeria," he asked, his dark eyes shining with an absolute, unwavering devotion that made my knees weak. "Not as a political pawn. Not as a dowager duchess. Marry me as the woman who holds my entire heart. Build a future with me. I promise you, it will be vastly more entertaining than a lonely seaside villa." I looked down at the future scourge of the continent, currently kneeling in a puddle, and asking me to be his equal. My perfectly logical survival plan was entirely in ashes. The plot was completely unrecognizable. And honestly, I couldn't have cared less. "You are going to ruin my reputation," I cried, laughing through my tears. "I will build you a new one," he promised fiercely. "Is it a yes?" "Yes." I breathed out, the word feeling lighter than air. "Yes, you absolute idiot. Yes." Lucius surged to his feet. He didn't even give me a second to brace myself before his hands tangled in my wet hair, pulling my face to his. When his lips finally met mine, it was a collision of years of unspoken tension, fear, and desperate relief. The kiss was deep, dizzying, and completely consuming. He tasted like rain and the faint, sweet trace of the morning tea he must have abandoned to chase after me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling myself flush against his chest, entirely surrendering to the chaotic, beautiful mess I had made of the timeline. Standing there in the pouring rain, sharing a dramatic, life-altering kiss with the male lead. It was the ultimate, painfully overused web novel trope. But as Lucius pulled me impossibly closer, I decided I really, truly didn't mind it one bit. Epilogue. 5 years is a surprisingly short amount of time when you aren't constantly looking over your shoulder for assassins, or plotting how to avoid a fiery, volcanic death. I sat on the sun-drenched balcony of the Arkenland Manor, sipping a perfectly brewed cup of chamomile tea. Down in the courtyard below, the absolute terror of the northern province was currently wreaking havoc. "Lau! Put the hound down. He is a highly trained guard dog, not a pony." My 3-year-old son, a miniature replica of his father complete with messy black hair and a dangerously stubborn pout, completely ignored me. He was currently trying to saddle a massive, terrifyingly muscular mastiff, who was taking the indignity with the patience of a saint. A pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested gently on top of my head. "Leave him be, Valeria," Lucius murmured, his deep voice rumbling against my back. "The dog clearly enjoys the attention. And Leo needs to learn cavalry tactics early." "He is 3. I sighed, leaning back into my husband's warm embrace. "The only tactics he knows involve weaponizing his own tears to get extra lemon tarts from the kitchen staff." Lucius chuckled, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. 5 years of marriage and ruling the province together hadn't aged him a day, though the terrifying scourge of the continent persona was now entirely reserved for corrupt tax officials, and anyone who dared to look at me the wrong way at society galas. To everyone else, the Duke of Arkenland was renowned as the wisest, most level-headed, and fiercely protective ruler the North had ever seen. "He takes after his mother," Lucius teased, calculating, ruthless, and highly motivated by carbohydrates. "I'll have you know my carbohydrate motivation saved your life," I retorted, turning in his arms to loop my hands around his neck. "That it did," he agreed softly. The playful glint in his dark eyes softened into that intense, unwavering devotion that still managed to make my breath hitch after all these years. He leaned down, capturing my lips in a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of sunshine and absolute peace. When we finally pulled apart, I looked out over the sprawling, prosperous estate. There were no rebellion banners on the horizon. There were no bloody crowns. The tragic, gruesome web novel I had read in my past life was well and truly dead, replaced by a messy, beautiful, completely unscripted reality. I had hijacked the genre, reformed the villain, and accidentally stumbled into the greatest love story of my life. By the way, Lucius said, casually resting his hands on my hips as we watched Leo finally give up on the dog and chase a butterfly instead. I reviewed the newest provincial defense budget. I approved the upgrades to the border walls, but I crossed out that bizarre requisition order you put in. I blinked. Which one? The one demanding the complete dismantling and outlawing of all catapults within a 500-mile radius, Lucius said, raising an amused eyebrow. Valeria, my love, who exactly are you expecting to launch into the sky? You never know, Lucius, I said defensively, adjusting the collar of his linen shirt. It's just good policy. I am simply being fiscally responsible and profoundly anti-magma. Lucius just laughed, a bright, joyous sound that echoed across the courtyard, pulling me close against his chest. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.